Have you ever wondered why some business people are more successful than others? Welcome to the Mentor List, a source of sound advice with your host, David Lewis. The Mentor List specialises in interviews with top business minds. Listen to their stories, list their habits, and most importantly, gather their advice for your career. This is the Mentor List.
Hi, welcome to today's episode of the Mentor List. Today we are on site, on location, here in the centre of Melbourne in the Royal Bank Chambers building, which is the location for the Melbourne Work Club. We're catching up with the founder and CEO, Soren Trampedach. Soren is a thought leader on innovation and the new work culture. He has an impressive 20-year career in leadership positions and continues to provide consultancy on workplace optimisation to industry leaders, including Google, Deloitte, NAB and Facebook. Soren created Work Club to provide established businesses with a unique boutique solution to the challenges posed by the rapid pace of change in the workplace environment, partnering with TEDx Sydney. So he's very travelled, international guest for you today. He's operating 3 very successful businesses in their own right, Olo, Work Club and Florence Guild. So I hope you enjoy my conversation today with Soren Trampedach. Soren Trampedach, welcome to the Mentor List.
Thank you.
So thanks for letting us come to, I guess, your workspace today. And I know you've got a flight to catch, so we're under the pump with time. But yeah, just welcome to the show. And I guess the first question, as it always is do you want to tell the listeners, and in this case the viewers, a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So Soren Trampedach, born in Denmark. Left Denmark in 1990, just for a few months, and never came back, kind of thing. So I went to London first, was there most of the 90s, ended up living in Spain, in Ireland, in Germany, in China, in Japan, in Hong Kong, and then ended up in Australia back in 2005.
So this is work or travel or play?
It was work initially. I had I started as a porter in a hotel in London, 5-star hotel, then became a concierge and ended up being a head concierge and started my own business in London in the early 90s and had a great time doing that.
You'd have some stories about, the guests there. I mean, the concierge.
Yes, lots of stories. It was 5-star in the early 90s and a young kid in London, so I enjoyed that. It was fun. It was good fun and a really good learning ground as well, around customer service, dealing with difficult guests as well, that expected the best in terms of 5-star. So in hindsight, a really great learning ground for later on. And then it was sort of, nothing was really planned. I didn't plan anything. It was opportunities that arose and I took a decision to either go with it or not, at the time. So I ended up 10 years with a big American firm.
Right.
One of the biggest office furniture manufacturers in the world.
Okay.
And,
is that Olo? Or?
No, that was Hayworth. So it's a $2 billion turnover, 15,000 people, and I started in Shanghai with them.
Fantastic.
In the sort of late 90s. And this is after having done lots of different things. I was in fashion and furniture, different things. I was trying different things out, nothing really planned. It just kind of just happened. But I ended up in Hayworth as head of North Asia.
Wow. So that's quite a big role.
It was a big role, but it was because there was a new head of the region, Asia Pacific, who came in. He wanted to change the existing team, and he needed new people on the team, basically. That was his people.
Okay.
And I was actually in Shanghai at the time, and I was doing a business course, doing business in China. It was through, I never went to university, but essentially in the late 90s I decided maybe I needed to go to some kind of school. So I went to, and I did a full-time MBA in Dublin.
Fantastic.
And as part of the thesis, the end of that, I was sort of talked into going to Shanghai to a business school there called CEIBS, China European International Business School.
Right.
They'd just done an exchange program with the school in Dublin, and it was this amazing program, 4 weeks of 4 hours a day doing business in China.
Wow.
And it was taught by the director of that school, which was a Belgian guy, who had lived many years in China and who had, at that time, he had 6 businesses, was the first foreigner to own a Ferrari in China. So he was an interesting guy, and he taught that course. And it was a small course, just 15 people, people from MIT, Stanford, great mix of people.
Fantastic.
And I went to do that course, basically 4 weeks, and ended up staying. And
so that was it. Never came back.
I was actually I had a business plan. I was going to go with a friend of mine who was Canadian. We were going to start up a business in Canada.
Wow.
Something called Bow Concept, which is it's a retail furniture concept. And we had the rights for Canada, and we were going to open. We had all the plan and the funding. Yep. And my ticket was around the world, and I was just going to stay a few months in Shanghai and ended up in Toronto.
Wow.
But I essentially called him up and said, I'm staying. Oh my God. And we're still good friends today, so it's all right. Because it was just way too exciting. There's so much happening. And within a month of having been at that school, I had all these job offers and opportunities that people at my age normally wouldn't get to.
So was that the final part of your MBA?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So that was a thesis as well.
Got it, okay.
And I started there as the head of North Asia, and I was just in the right time in the right place, I think, or right place at the right time. And ended up actually almost 11 years, 10, 11 years with them, and having 5 roles, I think, in the end with them, where the first was North Asia, then became... moved down here in 2005. Okay. They had bought a business in Australia, one of the biggest office furniture businesses here, and I was moved down as an MD. And eventually ended up being head of Asia Pacific. I was head of Asia Pacific, Middle East and Latin America.
Wow.
Which was a region that was about 50 million when I started, and we took it to 250 million in turnover, and the biggest in that industry.
Yep.
And the last role I had with that company was moving back to Europe, where I was head of Europe.
Okay. Which so you went back to sort of the European.
Yeah, and a very corporate role. It wasn't the black T-shirt; it was the suit and tie, not tie, but the suit and 3,000 people, 400 million euro turnover, 7 factories.
So you're in head office. In a corporate environment, very different to this one, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and I was basically heading up the whole business. So I was, a lot younger than everybody else. And the Germans didn't want to work with the French, and the French hated the Italians. And it was just a lot of politics, but they needed somebody from outside to come in and try and get everybody working together.
Wow.
And I did that to around 2010. In 2010, I went out and started my own business.
And which one was...
That was my furniture business. Okay. So
this is one of 3.
Yeah. Okay. Initially, it was a joint venture with the biggest European player at the time in office furniture called Biene. And I had 49.9% of the shares.
Right.
And unfortunately, they had 50.1% because they were listed on the Vienna Stock Exchange. So they needed that 0.1% to consolidate.
Okay.
But the business was Asia Pacific, including Australia. So we set up being Asia Pacific together. Like I said, I had 49.9%. I basically went out and hired a lot of people that I knew from my previous life.
Yep.
We had 7 offices, 100 people within 18 months, and was doing from 0 turnover to about 30 million US.
Within
18 months.
Wow.
So it was very fast because I knew the clients, and it was a quick process.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the partner, our Austrian partner, went into financial difficulties.
Okay.
Back in Austria.
Okay.
And I was very tight with Manfred Behne was the chairman, 72 years old.
Right.
The company was founded in 1782. He was, I don't know, the 5th or 6th generation, of running that company. And I was very close to him and the entire board, but they were removed overnight by the biggest bank of Austria, who basically went in and took over all of his shares, his 42%. So all of a sudden my joint venture partner was no longer people that I really knew and knew me and my background and really wanted this joint venture. They were now the biggest bank of Austria.
Wow. Okay. So that's a different stakeholder altogether.
And I didn't know any of this has happened. Actually happened. But I was in I'll never forget. I was in Hong Kong. Was asked to come on a video conference.
Right.
And 2 bankers were sitting opposite me and say, "We're now your partner. You know, we've taken over. They sat with 70% of the holding company at that point back in Austria.
Yep.
And they essentially told me that we want to restructure, and we don't want a joint venture.
Okay.
And that was the beginning of a very nasty divorce.
It's a very blunt greeting.
Yeah, and I mean, I tried everything for 10 months to try and find a way that we could continue.
Yep.
I tried to buy the Asian business. I tried to buy the global business. I tried to buy the Australian business, the China business, everything. But it just didn't succeed. There's a whole list of reasons for it, and one of the things, I have a view on failures, what you can learn from failures.
Yep.
Maybe I'll talk about that afterwards, but I'm not sure what I learned, but it was a very tough time because all of the entities basically collapsed. They stopped delivery of all the products, so we had no products. But we have
you got outstanding orders as well?
We had contracts with Nokia, BMW. We were building BMW's new factory in North China.
Wow.
Bank of America. I mean, you can list the names from the top 500, and they were our clients.
Right.
So when you can't deliver, there's no products. It's not fun to deal with those guys.
Wow.
So it was. The whole thing collapsed basically, and I said, "Well, what now?" And it took me a couple of months to sort of come up with what was next, and that was Work Club.
Right.
Basically, you know, Work Club was
where we are right now.
which is where we're sitting. Yeah, and I actually wrote the idea in 2005. So I had a whole business plan. I'd written it. This is what it feels and looks and smells like, and the whole theory behind it. And that's when I decided to do Work Club. So.
And
I'm
so
grateful
this is in
for what
Sydney,
happened, actually.
Where you started initially, or?
Sorry?
Was this in Sydney?
Yeah, so Sydney. So we opened Sydney 3 years ago.
Yep.
And it was a new business for me. It was a new area, but it's an area that I'm very passionate about. And, you know, thinking about my background, most people think that it's actually because I'm coming from a furniture or from a space background. Mm-hmm. You know, spaces, commercial spaces.
Yep.
But that's not the whole theory behind it. The whole theory is around diversity.
Right.
And part of what I did in Hayward was also heading up research and was part of think tanks around new ways of working, the future of work. And I've always been around progressive thinkers globally from technology perspective, from an organizational perspective to sort of hear about what's next. And I saw one of the first co-working places in New York in 2005.
Okay. And
I really liked the idea of that. I just didn't quite understand why it was so industry specific. And it comes back to a theory that I have and have had since
you've shared this with me many
years. But it's a theory. It's a bit fluffy, I guess, in some ways.
No,
but
I like it. You're going to have to share it now. You mentioned it.
Okay, so it's a theory around Leonardo da Vinci. So he lived in Florence in the early Renaissance time, but that was the center of the world in terms of new ideas, new cultures, new inventions, and he at the time was very calculative, almost, at least very conscious around who he surrounded himself with in his local network.
Yep.
Because he felt that diversity in that network elevated the quality of his works. This is the short version, very short version. I think if you fast forward to today, the relevance is that all the disruption, all the changes that are happening across all industries and disciplines are creating a lot of questions for all of us. And it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're an individual working from home alone, or you're a big multinational or national company or anything in between. If you work in isolation to some extent within your own tribe, network, industry, network, call it whatever you like, you're just less likely to find answers. If you move yourself outside of your tribe, network, industry, you increase the probability of at least getting different perspectives and possibly ideas. So for me, that diversity piece was always key in work clubs. So that's why we have an application process to ensure there is true diversity in the membership, because that's what it's about. So Sydney's been going longer than Melbourne, but in Sydney there's more than 50 different industries represented, everything from the very sort of conservative, wealthy, sort of high end of town through to the sort of crazy end of town, I would say, younger and sort of everything in between.
So you've got your guitar players and your billionaires.
And the philosophers and the sort of crazy. And you just by looking at people, you can see that very different. And that's what we want, that's what we like, and that's where we feel it's, to me, that whole diversity piece is almost, to me, it's essential for the future of work, future of business, because to me, it's almost a permission to play in the future. That's how I call it, and it's our role and job to create that diversity mix, and then try and create a platform for those different disciplines and industries and people to actually connect, create encounters, conversations between those. And it goes into a lot of what I talk about. I talk about antidisciplinary and the future of work, and how I think that's, whether we like it or not, I think it's just we're heading in a certain direction. And the more I think we can all learn and be aware of that, I think the better position we're in to reflect on what we're doing ourselves, and I think that's, to me, the whole reflection, the educational piece of Work Club is what it's really about. And then yes, because of my background in spaces, how does it smell, how does it feel, how does it look, is important as well.
Because there's a lot that goes into this place that maybe is I don't understand. I mean, I walked in here, so I found out about Work Club because I came here to interview Cameron Schwab a couple of weeks ago. And I can't put my words on what it is, but there's a feeling you get when you come in, and aesthetically, just everywhere you look, it just seems to all just work and flow. And I mean, there's obviously a lot of consideration and thought that goes into it, which I don't pick up at my I don't know what it is, but I mean, I don't want your secret sauce, but I mean, I don't want you to give away your secrets. But what, like, I don't know, maybe talk me through what's so different with Work Club as opposed to the corporate office that many of us or many of the listeners are probably in now, in terms of the actual space.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of many things. The people that's in here, all the furniture, for example, everything that's in here, it's from small factories in Europe or here locally made, and if it's timber, it is real timber, solid timber, raw timber, not glossed over. If it's leather, it's raw leather, not protected leather. It smells, all the smells, whether it's the timber, it's the wood, when you touch it, everything is there for a reason, because I think there's a whole well-being around it that most people won't really know where it's coming from, but it's kind of just there. So I think the textures, the smells, that every piece in here is made by somebody that's passionate about what they do. I think it comes through.
Yeah, it does.
In the actual products. And I think the challenge is often, it's got I guess a very homey feel, a very sort of, it's not high-end in the sense that you can't use, everything in here can be used. The leather is raw. We've got in the library, we've got a leather table. It's raw leather. So when people put a glass of water or a cup of tea or whatever it is they put on top of it, it makes marks.
Right.
And I love the marks. I think it's great. And people are thinking, this is, or maybe I shouldn't put it there. But we always say, no, so make yourself at home. And it's just, everything in here in 30 years is going to look better. It's going to still be great quality because it's built to last.
Fantastic.
And I think that's, but the textures, the smells, and sometimes taking things out, not stuffing a place with things. With furniture where it just becomes it's really busy.
And that's
I think
certainly
it's a
something
fine
I
balance.
see in the corporate space around, you want to get as many heads as you can in one area because it brings down your unit cost. And it's obviously quite opposite to here, where it's very spacious and many free desks. And it's,
and just the use of new and old. There's old things, there's new, there's quite a bit of art, and we just encourage everybody to bring all of themselves, whatever that is, dress-wise as well, so we want people to be comfortable.
There's a complete mix of suit and tie, or like yourself, t-shirt, and it's a really good mix. So I guess there's also a sort of a community aspect. I mean, there's a bar just behind us.
Yeah.
So you don't get that in all offices. So that sparks my interest. But did you want to talk about the Florence Guild and sort of how that fits in? So that's the sort of the trifecta of businesses that you're operating.
Yeah, so Florence Guild started in Work Club and was initially 3 years ago my attempt to bring that whole diversity together once a week. So the idea was, let's put somebody on a stool, bar stool, in the middle of the room. No slides, no technology, nothing except that person in the middle of the room passionate about that theme. And initially it was all about innovation, collaboration, disruption, those kind of themes. And we'll put a person on that stool specializing in education or politics or whatever it was, robotics, and they would start a conversation. And then sometimes I'll moderate, sometimes there'll be no moderators, but we'll limit the room to 60 people.
Okay.
And the room would reflect that diversity in our community. And we would then try and bring the wisdom out of the room, basically. So it became a real conversation, a bit of friction, well, like good friction. And it kind of grew for that. If initially it was just for members, but then members asked if they could invite guests, and we said yes, you can invite guests. And then the guest came to us and said, actually, we don't want to be a part of Work Club. We like to come to Florence Guild. And we said no for quite a long time. And then all of a sudden they kind of think, well, why not? And then it started up as its own little entity and identity, I guess. But the Florence Guild, the name comes from Da Vinci, from the theory, and really trying to bring people together. And the way I think is in our role as Work Club is to create these encounters and conversations. And Florence Guild is one level, which is the sort of 60 people level, but there's a limitation to the intimacy of a conversation when you're 60 people. So we have around the table 8 people, lunches, breakfast, dinners, where we get to a deeper level of intimacy, and then the one-on-ones. But Florence Guild is sort of just developed, I guess, over the last few years, just sort of organic. We've had amazing speakers.
Yeah, I was having a look at the lineup. There's some really big names. Do you want to mention maybe who was your favourite? Not your favourite, but one.
I can't.
Let's not select, but one you remember.
I sit there and I feel I'm learning. I normally try and get out of the way. I'm never part of it in any way. I'm not driving any agenda, so it's hard. I've got many that I love. I'm very excited about this year. So we have a new narrative, which is Antidisciplinary.
Yes, you're telling me about this. So do you want to maybe talk us through Antidisciplinary?
Yeah. Well, to me, that's the future of business. So if you think, older businesses very industry specific, top down, not so much collaboration or interaction between industries. If I look at Work Club, it's kind of the entry point into. We're creating that diversity, and we are encouraging links between those different industries and disciplines.
Sure.
The end point is that it's not about actually collaborating between one or two industries. If you think about tech, it's been tech plus some industry, maybe another industry. But in the future, it'll be 4, 5, 6 disciplines collaborating, working across these disciplines on specific topics or challenges. So the complexity in terms of collaborating, working together, is just enormous. It's a hybrid. It's across all these disciplines. And to me, that's coming, whether we like it or not. It's already happening. Technology is a big piece of that. And therefore, I think antidisciplinary as a word it's no longer about the discipline. It's about new disciplines appearing out of all this collaboration. And then, well, what does that mean? What does it mean from organizational structure perspective? How do you need to organize you as an organization to actually be responsive, to be able to do that kind of work? That's a major question. How does that actually link into education? How does it link into politics and so on? And I mean, my biggest area of interest right now is actually the organizational structure. What should you be doing as a business in terms of your own structure, of your teams, your people? I don't believe it's top down. It becomes really emergent, and that's a key word is emergence, where it basically is from bottom up. How do you structure your business in such a way that your frontline staff, everybody cares and goes that extra mile? because that's what's needed in that environment. How do you create a community or a client base that is participating in developing that community client base? They have a participation within your boundaries. So a lot of my thinking is around that. How do and I'm trying to apply it to Work Club in terms of the way that we structure ourselves as a business, in the way that we look at our community. These are two things, because I think if you don't adjust that in the coming years, you're going to disappear.
Yeah, right.
So to me, it's almost like it's urgent, it's necessary. I'm trying to learn more and tapping into academia and different kind of areas and around the world, also to try and really learn from case studies and try and bring that here to Florence Guild as well and talk about that this year.
Great. Okay. Well, I'll definitely link to sort of Florence Guild and also obviously Work Club. So for anyone that's sort of listening in, and no doubt they'll be resonating with, you can hear the passion come through with what you're saying, and they can sort of click through and maybe join up to your club or have a look at some of the speakers that are coming up in the Florence Guild. So I guess, I just wanted to move into some of the more structured questions from the Mentalist cue card on rapid fire questions. They're not that rapid. The questions are, the answers aren't. So just some advice to yourself. I mean, multiple countries, multiple languages. I mean, what would you tell yourself 10, 15, 5 years ago if there was that one bit of advice you could give yourself?
I think I'm really glad that I did all that travel, and for many years I worried about not having a university but always I think I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot from a cultural perspective in having worked. I've worked in all continents, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, Middle East, here, except for Africa. It's the only place I haven't worked. So I think that was the best education.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't do anything different.
So do you think these locations, has been a big factor in the diversity that sort of flows into all these other areas? So you've seen so many different cultures and places and ways of life. It must play a big part.
Yeah. And I mean, for 10, 11 years, I was working with teams all the time. It was all about managing teams and I think one thing I learned was that the more diverse it was, the more better outcomes most of the time. And often it was the ones that was not from the disciplines. If you brought them into the room, you will get new ideas.
Yeah.
And I think if you're educated in one discipline and you're very, it's very hard to look at that discipline from the outside.
Yeah. Very interesting. And just maybe some habits. So, I imagine running 3 businesses, and I mean, you're back off to Sydney in about 20 minutes. I mean, there's a lot going on. I mean, is there habits that you could share with the listeners around, how you're able to sort of, I guess, deal with so much? And I mean, what's your secret? What are you doing?
I'm very disciplined in terms of, there's like 3 things I look at. I look at sleep. I try and get my 7-8 hours. Important. I always get my 7-8 hours. Yep. I train in the morning for about 45 minutes.
So is this weights or cardio or
anything? I just need to do something.
Something physical.
And it's a mental thing. It is a physical. I go to the gym, I go for a run, or do whatever. But it's a mental thing. I have to do that. It's to clear my head. It's just to start the day that way. And then eating well. Monday to Friday, I'm very disciplined in terms of what I eat, and because I feel if I do those 3 things right and consistent, I almost feel like a machine, in a way that I actually I can do so much more. I can keep going. I can go the whole day, and if I stick to that, in terms of my output, it's just. It's like an athlete in a way. I think if I get these 3 right, I'm a machine. I can go on.
Yep.
And then there's always the times, like right now, where you observe yourself and you're, always look at my own sort of lever. And sometimes I feel, because it's intense, I work from I get up to go to bed right now at the moment, because there's certain things I want to achieve.
Yep.
And at times you come, the lever gets close to the madness end of the scale. But at least I think I'm sort of able to actually acknowledge it and sort of
be very aware
tell the team I'm actually close on that side. So bear with me if there's a lot of, intensity and swearing, at the moment.
I haven't had my 7-8 hours. So I haven't hit the gym for 3 days.
So I'll pre-warn, and then generally they're okay with it.
Yeah, got it. Great, thanks for sharing that. So the other one was just a quote. Whether you had a quote that you'd like to share with the listeners.
I don't have a particular quote. I subscribe to Seth Godin's blog. I love that. I think there's some great quotes there that sometimes I read a piece, I save it, and I share it with the team at a certain point where I think it's relevant. Because sometimes it says something that I think or believe in a better way than I can do myself.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll link to some of his blogs as well.
But I read quite a lot and very diverse. I try to. I think Monday night I bought 20 books.
Oh wow! Okay.
So I normally have a list.
Physical books, or
it's different. Some are it's complete mix.
Okay. But, diversity of
yes
as well.
But I have a list and I add. When I hear about books or I hear somebody recommend, you should read this, I write them down, and when I get to about 15, 20, I buy them all at one go.
Okay, fantastic. So what are you reading at the moment?
I just finished reading an amazing book called Whiplash.
Okay.
It was written by the MIT Media Lab in US, the director of that lab, ITO.
Okay.
ITO. Amazing book, and I think it actually sets out really well, to me, in a very rational, logical way, the future of business.
Yeah.
And it's very, I got very excited because it's very aligned to, the way I look at it. So it's worth,
So how does Whiplash, the title, sort of play into that?
It's just a change, it's a good point. I haven't actually thought about the connection to that, but it's just broken down in a logical way of explaining the paradigm shifts that we are going through. And again, I think it's regardless of whether you and I like it or think it's good or not good.
Yeah.
It's happening.
Yeah.
So the more you can be aware of those shifts, the more choice you have, or the more ability you have to adjust what you're doing.
Fantastic. So just while we're on books, is there one you'd recommend that, it sounds like you're thumbing through a lot, so...
Actually, I would probably say Whiplash, because that's
Whiplash,
I think that's probably the best that I've read right now.
Fantastic. No problem. All right, well, thank you for sharing that, and I'll have links to that up on the show notes online. But just so the last question, so we're right on time, and we'll get you on your plane.
Good.
And get you away.
They're probably delayed anyway. They're always delayed between Sydney and
London. You'll be sitting on the tarmac for half an hour, and we could have kept going. But all good. Just so the listeners are they're tuned in, they're listening in, and they're resonating with what you're saying. How would they go about getting in contact with you, and what would they sort of contact you about?
Well, I think, so our website is workclubglobal.com or florenceguild.com, or if it's the furniture side, I can talk for days about furniture and, handmade things, so that's Olo Group.
Yep.
But get in contact with us through Work Club perhaps, and come in for one of our talks and experience what it's all about. It's hard to explain if you haven't been in and actually sat and listening in and see and observe what happens. So maybe that's a good entry point, because I think that will you will actually get a chance to see the community and the diversity and the kind of conversations we have.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, well, thank you again for coming on the show, and
thank you.
Appreciate your time, and for everyone else, tune in again for next week for another great show.
Thank you for listening to The Mentor List with your host, David Lewis. If you like what you're hearing on The Mentor List, The best way to support the show is to take just a few seconds to leave a rating and comment over on iTunes. You can also find further information about this show and links to further episodes at www.mentorlist.com.au. Until next time, this is the Mentor List.